G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now we do have a fair bit to talk over today, although it has been a slower day in the media, but we need to look at some very large assaults that have occurred, these massive mechanized attacks. Of course, we're going to have a look at the maps. We're going to talk about loans and credit ratings as well, and the ability to borrow more money as far as where Ukraine is sitting with potential loans and those frozen assets that are sitting in, say, Europe that have been seized from Russians. And we're also going to have a look at a drone, some energy stuff, mobilization, and new sackings in Ukrainian government from President Zelensky. Now, what I want to look at first is I'm actually going to go over the Ministry of Defense because they talk about sanctions and the effectiveness and what is happening a little bit for, I guess, down the lines of this. But sanctions likely continue to disrupt key imports for Russian defense industries, Russia's isolation limits, and the number of countries it can directly trade with, highly likely increasing the time and cost to acquire items it can produce freely. So we know this is going to have problems. That said, a lot of the slack that has been caused from other areas are getting picked up by other countries. Now, if sanctions were truly working to the extent people thought that they would, Ukraine wouldn't be forced to be targeting these Russian refineries and targeting facilities that are crucial to Russia's economy. Now, we look at Russia, while Russia has increased production of key munitions, most heavily used in Ukraine, such as artillery shells, the impact of the sanctions is highly likely greatest on Russia's more advanced and complex weapon systems. These systems in production and development almost certainly have an increased reliance on foreign components and technology. Great, but we're going to talk about this. The war so far, what we've seen, the most impressive weapons by far that have actually changed the war, and not these high-tech super weapons by any means, whether from the West into Ukraine or from Russia being used in Ukraine. The weapons that have changed the whole war as a whole, I think it comes down to really three. I think the use of disposable FPV drones, like your kamikaze drones, first and foremost for Ukraine and for Russia, have been the biggest impact on the war as a whole, against tanks, against infantry, for reconnaissance, everything. I think first and foremost, that is it. And how are these made? Well, you can make them at home using components you buy online, and they're incredibly cheap. It's easy to learn how to do. Now, secondly, I think is Ukraine's kamikaze drone boats. Again, I know these are then more technical, but it's not something like a bloody F-22 or a Su-57. It's still a domestically made product that uses simple parts, off-the-shelf parts, and have had a huge, huge impact on the war. Now, the third weapon system is for Russia. I think it's had the biggest effect in the war, at least in the last quarter, has been Russia's Fab glide bombs. Again, this isn't some high-tech super weapon. It is something you can produce a lot of using simple parts, and you've got a lot of them. Now, what these three weapon systems I talk about, I know there's others that have big effect, but what these three have all in common is it's easy to make a lot of them, and they're cheap and can be operated by someone with minimal training. As far as the FPV area and the glide bombs at least put together, I know a pilot will have a lot of training. But I think that is where we go wrong with a lot of our military goods, when we need to think about our development of them, because we are so focused on this high-tech outlook that realistically it rewards shareholders through R&D and speculation more so than actually the fighters on the front lines. Ukraine is not asking for more high-tech equipment. They're asking just for more ammunition, more shells, more interceptors for the air defense. Now, I know they are more high-tech, but I think we need to look at what is having success on the front line in this war and what then isn't. And those systems, they're having the biggest effect there. Now, sanctions likely continue to disrupt both supply and demand for Russia's arms exports. So, yeah, that brings it down because they're using a lot of it, as well as significantly complicating payment mechanisms for Russia, almost certainly contributed to significant decline in Russian arm exports and increased delivery delays. We've seen that with places like India. That said, the sanctions against Russia are not having anywhere near the effect people thought they would and hoped that they then would have either. So it is interesting to look at what actually caused an effect in this war and what is bloody just really expensive. Of course, cheaper, simple weapons can be made in much larger quantities. And what we're seeing on the front line is this quantity over quality. They just need more. And that is where the West is absolutely limited on Ukraine. We just can't get enough stuff in, just enough shells, enough bullets, enough interceptors, and Ukraine's having a problem with just enough men. Now, we need to talk about mobilization that's come out as well today. Now, this is a poll done by the Institute of Social and Political Psychology for the national economy of this science of Ukraine. Now, this talks about how people feel towards those avoiding mobilization, conscription, because we know that has to come for Ukraine soon. Now, on one hand, half of the respondents, 53.9%, agree with the statement, those who avoid mobilisation can be understood. No one wants to die. So about 54% agree with that statement. Now, I think pretty much everyone could agree at some point with that statement. Now, only 17.2% disagree with this, and the other 29% do not have a clear answer. Residents in the southern regions are ready to show the greatest loyalty in this matter, among whom more than 70% believe that those who want to evade mobilisation can be understood. Probably more so those who have seen the war, that if you're asking way out in the West here, probably less understanding than people who are in the East and the South as well. Now, at the same time, sociologists record that 43% of respondents feel ashamed of men who are hiding from mobilisation. Now, their statement says a contradictory attitude towards mobilisation, which can manifest itself both at the level of public consciousness and in the minds of the individual citizens. It is a significant challenge for the military political leadership of the state and will require the use of psychological measures to effectively ensure mobilisation. So, propaganda. What we do know is Ukraine has a manpower shortage. How is this caused? By people not volunteering. Therefore, you're going to have a conscription force mobilization further of that. Incredibly unpopular, as well as though popularity definitely decreases with non-success on the front line. So we've looked at polls before that have shown when build up into the counteroffensive, how that was being talked up, when the counteroffensive was going well-ish, I guess in the beginning, that was, you know, the favorability of that was up, and then now it would be at an all-time low. Now, we will talk about this sacking before we move into then the maps. Now, this is from Interfax Ukraine that Zelensky fires 4 advisors, including his commissioner for Ukraine defenders' rights. Now, what we do know is Zelensky has been on a mission for the last couple of months, sacking a lot of senior members of his council. As well, Zelensky's official president term ended yesterday, but with martial law, doesn't have to hold votes, and has spoken about how difficult those votes would have to be for a democratic system and elected official. So we will see how that goes from there, but I don't think we'll see any change on that recently. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, dismissed Olena Verbska from the post of advisor commissioner of the president of Ukraine as well. He dismissed external advisors here, these 3 from their posts. So we're not exactly sure what has happened there, but we know there are big shifts all the time in that system. Now, before we have a look at the maps, I want to actually talk about the weather, as the weather is getting better and is being reported to be becoming better and better for armoured movements. That you can see that through April, it is warming up both in the day and at night, and will be starting to dry out, coming out of winter into that sort of mud season that we're in at the moment, but is drying out, and then will be much more favourable for land movements, and we are expecting to see more Russian offensives as well. And the ISW does talk about this, that Russian forces have not conducted a mechanized assault this large since the beginning of Russian localized offensive to seize Avdiivka in late 2023. And we're going to talk about this large offensive that took place down into Thankyou, where Ukraine claims to have destroyed 12 of 36 Russian tanks and 8 of the 12 armored fighting vehicles. But what's interesting about this is actually the location of where this then took place. And we will talk about that. So this is some of the footage here. You can have a look at it on my Telegram if you would like. Mute this. So these Russian armoured assault here, consisting of many vehicles like we spoke about, and then is targeted by a lot of Ukrainian munitions, both drones, ATGM, and artillery as well. So you can see it did get hit very hard, and you can see as well the amount of armoured vehicles that were then destroyed and or abandoned here. Now, what is most interesting about this is actually the location of where this then took place. So we'll jump onto a Google map, as then we have the geolocation here. So where we're looking is Thankyou or Mansk. So we're just sitting right where these paddocks meets then the road here. Now, what you will notice is this is significantly behind the front line of where some of the maps show. So I found this very interesting. We have Avdiivka, we have Thankyou, and we've got, of course, Murmansk. Now, we'll come down. This is then where the road sits down in here. So we have a look again. It's just right near where this road is and this paddock here. So we're looking right about here, which is significantly behind where the front line is showing. So let's say 1.5 kilometers out from there, and we do some more measures, then it's about 2.5 kilometers to Murmansk. But of course, this is sitting behind where then the first line of defense is sitting down here that will then cross into Murmansk. So I thought that was interesting of where those vehicles are actually up to. And this is maybe the reason we saw then the movement of the grey zone a few days ago. Now, the deep state map hasn't updated today, but I thought it was interesting to have a look at where that offensive actually took place. And we expect to see in attacks like this large losses as well. Now, it is a positive indicator that Ukraine's ability to defend against future large-scale Russian assaults and the expected 2024 Russian offensive operation. So this isn't what we're seeing now, what the ISW and a lot of other organizations have been talking about, large Russian offensives. We've been hearing for a while there's going to be something, whether it's up in the northeast, whether it's in the east, whether it's in the south, we don't know. But Ukrainian officials, justifiably so, continue to warn about Ukraine's ability to defend against the expected summer Russian offensive effort in the face of ammunition shortages, manpower limitations, and delayed Western assistance. Of course, pointing at the US. Ukrainian forces may have had to expend significant amount of materials to defend against Russian assault near Thankyou, highlighting Russia's ability to conduct assaults that force Ukraine to expend outsized portions of its already limited material and manpower. So this is a problem that Ukraine is facing more and more. Yes, maybe they are stopping some of this moving forward, although Russia is inching forward step by step, but how much of their munitions, their manpower, their assets are being used to stop this that is wearing down already in the face of those shortages, that if and when Russia do launch their 2024 summer offensive campaign, how will that look if there's not a resupply into the Ukrainian lines? And it's not far away. We're in early April. You're talking a few months to train new men, to get new stuff to the front line takes a long time. Even if that money is signed off by America, it's still going to take time for this to then happen. Now, Ukrainian officials have recently warned that Russian forces are accumulating personnel along the Kharkiv-Luhansk axis, so up in sort of the northeast, near Bakhmut, near Avdiivka, and in western Zap Oblast. So there's a lot getting there, getting ready for where they push. But the ISW continues to assess that Russian forces will likely only be able to launch a concerted large-scale offensive operation in one operational direction at a time due to Russia's own manpower and planning limitations. And so this is interesting. They're saying that they're only going to be able to launch in one spot, so full-on in one area, whether that's Bakhmut, whether it's Avdiivka. It's probably looking like it's going to be around this front, but not on multiple axes at the same time. Now, this may be a good move too. In many people's eyes, this was Ukraine's undoing of their own offensive last year, was that they focused in too many axes at once. They should have focused in one area and pushed through when you do have limitations on your manpower and your assets. So whether it's armored assets or airborne assets as well. So they're saying that there are the limitations there. That said, we will not know exactly how this looks moving forward. So let's have a look at just another little bit of footage here before we have a look. So this is down in Mariupol. We see this glide bomb then hit this bridge right here. So you can see that strike, and then the bridge has been then destroyed. Now, we do know that Russia has moved a lot of forces down into the Zapoblast near Mariupol here, and people have speculated that they're not looking to make any ground here, but they need to just tie up Ukrainian assets here and manpower. So this is the bridge right here that crosses then the Hercha River. So if we zoom in on Mariupol, it is this bridge right here. Now, I've been Mariupol a couple of times, and it's a pain in the ass to get around with this river here. That to get down into Mariupol, you need to come down this road or this road, but we came down this one. Of course, we're coming from Dnipro, but you need to cross this And of course, any supply into here also needs to cross this. So it does have further effect. Of course, it is just extending how you're getting across here. And the fields around here are incredibly muddy around this time. I've actually been lost in the fields around here in my 4-wheel drive at the time there. So there is that successful strike there. Now we will come back up into Avdiivka. Of course, like I said, the deep state map hasn't updated today at time of filming, but we do have a Ukrainian sources map from Noel Reports, as well as then the Suryak map as well. Now, what we're looking at is Thankyou and Orlivka here. Now, this is very difficult to line up, but it does look like the Russian advance here, that this may line up somewhere where that Russian assault took high losses. So there has been some movement down on like this horn here, although I think it should be looking much maybe further out, but we don't know how that assault actually ended. We only have the footage of it actually just being hit very hard and the leftover material, but how much ground was made, we're unsure. But we have then the Suryak map as well, showing a further movement out in this direction over here, as well as movement out of some of these areas. So we can see this is Thankyou and Ulmansk, where we have been talking about previously. But Russian army continue advancing west of Thankyou and force Ukrainian army to retreat to the other shore of the Derna River from this axis. So moving across the Derna, which we know is splitting where then the first line of defense is, across the Derna River. In addition, following the recent capture of Vodany, Russian troops began advancing north of the locality while Ukrainian forces began the withdrawal and headed to the east where the trench system is located. So moving back to trench systems that have then been developed and armed, especially over the last few weeks, moving out between this Pervomayski-Thankyou area where it is closing down and it is open field through here. The goal will be to get into this Derna River area here for the Russian forces to try and capture this area in here up until that second line of defense, at least in then the short term. We need to move up to just north a little bit into Bakhmut. So we have Bakhmut here, but where we're going to be focusing is Chasiv Yar, Ivanovsky, Kromove, where we do have seen over the past couple of days, we did see this movement by the Russian forces into the first sort of areas, at least the first trench systems that sit for the protection of then Chasiv Yar. So we have a look then on Noel Reports map. Now, again, very difficult to actually see what's going on, but you can see where this Ivanovsky road has the sort of the peak, like the apex of the turn. It does come up, so it is showing there is more ground made through here, as well as sitting in then this first tree line down here. So I believe these two maps are pretty close, but that's the movements he's showing then for today. Now let's have a look then on the Suryak map, and we see the same movement here between these two tree lines, but at a push down just to the north, which I believe these are showing very, very close. We also have some footage to look at from here as well. Now, I just screenshot these differently, but situation north of Bakhmut. During the last 3 days, Russian army took control over the first trench line in the southeast of Canal microdistrict and positions at Mount Baba. Moreover, Russian troops entered the forest adjacent to the microdistrict. On the other hand, Russian forces have failed in their attempts to increase the buffer zone around Ivanovsky, where Ukrainian drones have managed to destroy several Russian mechanized vehicles. So down near Ivanovsky, down in here, they are having a hard time trying to increase that buffer zone. And we have then the footage here of the amount of destruction for Russian armor here as well. As we know, this area has just been under unbelievable assault for basically the entirety of the war. You can just see how damaged everything is around here, trying to get more territory out around Ivanovsky. Now, what we're going to have a look at on this is where we're talking about, and we'll always hear about the higher ground in here. Now, I've driven in here many, many times, and the rolling hills really pick up just between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. This is why Bakhmut was so important to hold and was so heavily defended for a long time, is there's a lot of advantage with the high ground. But what we can see, and why Russia is trying to get a buffer zone around Ivanovsky, is some of the high ground and the forest areas that sit between Ivanovsky and Chasiv Yar just in here. But we can see that they have extended control over more of the high ground coming through near Bodanivka as well. So the high ground in here, there is rolling hills between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut, but it does really flatten out beyond that. So that is why this is so important in this area, and why it will continue to be somewhere we will look very inquisitively on over the next months, or however long this will then go for. Now, up in Kharkiv, where we do know, so we're talking Kharkiv Oblast up here, where there's been many assaults, attacks, as well as ISW talking and many talking about the increase in Russian forces in this area, we do know there has been huge assaults on the power grid up here. So this is from the mayor of Kharkiv. More than $10 billion are needed to rebuild everything that Russia destroyed in Kharkiv. So this is everything, but it's also a hell of a lot of money. Russia began to hit the city with new ammunition. They traveled a distance of up to 90 kilometers. There have already been 2 strikes in the city last week. The Russians are also attacking with S-300. We do know that there are glide bombs coming into some areas here as well, using those ones with the small engine on them as well to push them further. But today in Kharkiv, almost all of the critical energy infrastructure has been destroyed, and private infrastructure has also been destroyed. More than 150,000 Kharkiv residents are left homeless, and we have heard numbers of months that it could take to get power back onto residents here, and that a lot of people who have come back into Kharkiv are then starting to leave again. Now, a very important drone was shot down for Russia today. So this is a 4-post drone here. Now, this has said to be shot down by the Ukrainian forces, and Ukrainian forces have provided evidence of this with the destroyed 4-post drone. Now, the 4-post drone is a recon drone which is capable of conducting surveillance at an altitude of about 5 kilometers, so 3 miles, but it can be up there for 16 hours. Now, this also can carry 2 missiles in some configuration as well. Now, interesting with these were actually purchased like well back in the mid-O's from Israel, revamped, whatever, and now it's changed into what is now become the 4-post. Now, we need to speak over credit, loans, all of this, seized assets. Now, I will say I'm not an expert in finances bloody at all, so we're going off what someone has sent me who I know does have well more idea than I do, but you may want to disagree with some of this, and I'm all open to any constructive criticism as well. So let's have a look at this. Hey man, don't know if you've heard about the Russian asset plan. Might be the first good news Ukraine has had in a while. Strategic update first. While Ukrainian drone strikes against Russian oil refineries have affected the long-term oil export capacity of Russia, these strikes have in turn increased the price of existing Russian oil in the short term, so supply and demand. These actions by the GUR will be effective in the long term, but are definitely not the best course of action as Russia now enjoys increased cash reserves due to these strikes. Secondly, the following proposals were made recently by the EU, US and UK in regards to the use of frozen Russian assets. Number 1, the EU proposal involves using EU law to harmonise existing windfall assets on Russian assets to create national defence tax capable of taxing the interest on all Russian assets. So you're not touching what is seized, it's just the money that has then made, then you're sending to Ukraine. 2, the US proposal involves the creation of a $50 billion bond, the coupon of which would be repaid by the interest created by the assets. The UK has offered a $30 billion loan with the Russian assets kept as collateral. These proposals are a lot better than the socialist idea of seizing assets and are definitely heading more in the right direction of trying to support Ukraine, if only 2 years late. These ideas, though, seem a bit half-baked. So these seizing assets and people saying, let's just sell them off, of course, that can underwrite a lot of either the dollar, the pound, the euro for security of foreign investment into those systems. Now, while the national defence tax is a good idea to help combat sanction avoidance or to target toxic assets, in reality, however, a tax like this will disincentivise future investment. The US use of the $50 billion bond is designed to force Russia to repay for damages, as if they ever want these assets back, their assets will remain frozen until Russia pays back on the bond. So they have to pay to Ukraine as well, and then they can get these back. However, ignoring the whole logic of getting Russia to pay the bond, both the US and UK's policies act as a glass cannon, as once a bond has been raised, the bondholders require Russia or Ukraine to pay investors or bondholder back. This would then in turn become a junk bond for Ukraine, which Russia will almost certainly not pay back. As such, the best option in reality would be a mixture of the above options, as if a $100 billion bond, half from the EU and half from the US, was issued to the current asset holders on the condition that any interest be shared via a joint account. This would provide return for all investors and would allow the allies to use the fund as collateral to create a very large loan for Ukraine. The fundamental issue is what a loan or bond will be used to pay for. Ideally, it would be used to create a sovereign wealth fund capable of building effective anti-air, so air defense, to protect Odessa's port and merchant marine, able to defend its shipping lanes so resource extraction and exports can restart. So restarting Ukraine's economy, or at least keeping it where it is. Such actions are vital to the restart of the economy and Ukraine achieving its EU alignment goals as laid out in Ukraine's National Recovery Plan. So you can actually look up the full Ukrainian National Recovery Plan here as well, and what their overall objectives are leading through years and years' time. But what we can see in this as well is it's very, very expensive. That up to $750 billion. And of course, this is going to get more and more expensive as then the war goes on. I should have said the Kharkiv mayor in that interview we talked about before, he said that that's where it is now and it gets more expensive every single day. So we'll talk about Ukraine's credit score as well in this. In short, spending on defense articles is an option. However, Ukraine will be limited to the size of the loan given, and if spending is done poorly, as has been the case so far for Ukraine, will continue to spiral down an economic doom loop with very little chance of recovery. This is important as Ukraine's credit score continues to fall to the point where Ukraine has stated to devalue its currency due to the lack of foreign cash reserves. So you can see here as well that March 8th, S&P Global Ratings lowered its FC long-term sovereign credit issue ratings on Ukraine from CC to CCC. The outlook on the sovereign long-term sovereign FC rating is negative. And you can see where then this is sitting down here. That is either extremely speculative or default imminent with little prospect for recovery. That it's not in a good place at the moment. Furthermore, the destruction of the Zap hydro power station has affected Ukraine's energy resilience and will force Ukraine to buy more energy abroad due to the increased demand. Ukraine has also increased taxes on petroleum products to align with EU. This will have major knock-on effects for the Ukrainian economy, as while those in Kyiv can catch a bus, truckers, other businesses and industry will suffer. So, not a great economic outlook. That said, we don't know how this is looking and who will forgive loans, pay loans, and how it will look down the line. Realistically, we have no idea where this is going to go. We do know that post-war, countries with obliterated economies can be unbelievably strong following that money going in. Look at Japan, look at Germany, areas like this. Now, legends, this one was hard to get through, but look after yourself, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.